these two topics first. We'll do these two topics and then we'll come to the past perspectives. Okay, now what is Phillips curve? Phillips curve is basically a graph, a concept that explains the relationship between unemployment and inflation, right? Graph that shows relationship between unemployment in a country and inflation rate. Shows the relationship between countries unemployment and inflation. Okay, now have a look at this. So this was Phillips. It was a New Zealand economist, and what he did was that he was interested in knowing the relationship between inflation and unemployment, right? That what's the relationship between these two economic variables. So what he did was that he digged real data from different economies, and then he started plotting the data on the graph, right? And what he came to find was that there is an inverse relationship between unemployment and inflation. So he took inflation rates on the y-axis, right? So have a look at this. So he took inflation on the y-axis, and he took unemployment on the x-axis, right? So inflation rate is on the y-axis, and you have anything above zero we know is positive rate of inflation, right? And anything in the negative side of y-axis will be negative inflation, which is basically known as deflation, right? And on the x-axis you will take the values of unemployment, that what is the unemployment rate in certain country, which would be measured just simply by estimating that how many people are looking for work but can't find job, right? So that is what you do, right? So unemployment is on the x-axis and inflation is on the y-axis. Now, what you have, what he found out of this relationship with inflation and unemployment was a downward sloping curve, right? So he found something of this sort, right? Now, what this shows actually is that higher your unemployment. Now, have a look at this. So we are doing Phillips curve right now, right? So higher the unemployment in the country, lower would be your rate of inflation. Why? As you can see for yourself that it's downward sloping, right? Now, if I have to choose some random values, think about this. So at 5% rate of inflation in the country, sorry, at 5% rate of unemployment in the country, how much will be the inflation rate? Let's say 4%, right? Now, if unemployment rate keeps increasing, right, you can see for yourself that inflation will decrease. Now, what's the reason for that? Now, let's try to understand the reason for this negative relationship between inflation and unemployment, right? Now, think about this. If more people are out of work, if more people, so two major reasons of inflation that we discussed in AS economics was demand pull inflation and cost push inflation. So demand pull inflation is when there's more aggregate demand, people are demanding more goods and services, they're spending more, and that results in rise in price level. The second major reason for inflation is cost push inflation. So cost push inflation happens when the cost of production is rising because wages are increasing, or let's say rent, electricity, or anything of the sort is increasing, and that results in higher cost of production, which results in higher prices, right? Now, in both these cases, students, have a look at this. Now, out of these two, Phillips curve shows you the relationship. It's basically showing you the demand pull inflation, because think about this, unemployment has nothing to do with the cost of production. In fact, it should reduce cost of production if unemployment is more, because then labor will be cheaper and the cost of production should fall. But what Phillips curve mainly focuses on is demand pull inflation. Now, let me explain you. Think about this. So if there is lesser number of people unemployed, think about this. This means that more people are working. When more people are working, what will they do? They will have higher incomes, higher purchasing power, right? So when they spend more in the economy, obviously, we can imagine that aggregate demand will increase, like the same graph that we have been talking about again and again, right? So the aggregate demand shifts to the right, and when aggregate demand shifts to the right, what happens? Your prices increase. On the y-axis, you have general price level, right? The macroeconomic equilibrium graph that we have always looked at. So on the y-axis, you have general price level. On the x-axis, you have real GDP. So real GDP will be on the x-axis. And then you have downward sloping aggregate demand, normal downward sloping demand curve, which is your aggregate demand like this. And upward sloping is your aggregate supply like this, right? And where the two intersect, that is your macroeconomic equilibrium. Yes or no, right? That is your macroeconomic equilibrium, right? So you have GPL and then you have real GDP. Okay. Now with higher aggregate demand, which means that, more people are employed, we know already that aggregate demand is made up of 5 components, which includes consumption, investment, government spending, exports, and imports. So when more people are in work, which means unemployment is low, then people are working, they are earning something. And obviously when they earn income, they spend on different goods and services that they need. So consumption of the country increases. When that increases, your aggregate demand increases. And overall, your aggregate demand shifts to the right, like this, upwards, right? And with that happening, you can see for yourself that here will be your new macroeconomic equilibrium where you will experience higher rate of inflation. Are you guys getting me? Right? So this is the entire concept that Phillips curve explained, right? Now let's look at this one more time and then move forward. So what is Phillips curve? Phillips curve is a graph that shows a relationship between countries' inflation and unemployment, right? Now this is based on one thing that I was telling you, based on actual data. Back in the day when Philip, who was an economist, New Zealand economist, came up with this idea, he used actual data. So this is not a theory, this is actual data, based on actual data of the countries. Right? So it's not what he hypothesized. This is based on actual data. Based on actual data gathered from different countries. Right? So when he plotted the data of inflation and unemployment, he observed inverse relationship between the two variables. So he saw that when unemployment rate increases, what happens? Your inflation rate decreases, and vice versa. When unemployment is decreasing, like it's moving left, right? When it's moving left on the x-axis, then you will move above, you will move upwards on the y-axis. So that is what it shows, right? And after a certain point in time, right, as per this graph, after a certain rate of inflation, let's say this is 10%, what will that do? That will cause, so if unemployment in a country is greater than this rate, what will that do? It will cause deflation according to this graph. Again, I'm saying this, right? Because we don't know if this relationship still holds true in the, in the modern economies, right? But according to this graph, if the unemployment rate is anywhere higher than, let's say, 10% that you can see over here, right? So let's say if this is 12%, so according to this graph, the rate of inflation will be negative, which is basically deflation. So instead of prices increasing, prices will decrease. That is what the graph predicts, right? So that's what the graph predicts, right? And this rate of unemployment, where the graph intersects with the x-axis, this is known as non-accelerating rate of inflation. Non-accelerating rate of unemployment, non-accelerating, because we know at this rate there will be no increase in the rate of inflation. Non-accelerating, what do we call that? Non-accelerating rate of unemployment. Is this making sense? Non-accelerating rate of unemployment. Because at this rate, you can see at this rate of unemployment, since the graph is cutting the x-axis, so at this rate, how much will be your inflation? Inflation rate will be 0%. Like it's neither inflation nor deflation. So that is the entire concept. Okay, now understanding what is the theoretical relationship, what is the theoretical understanding of inverse relationship between inflation and unemployment? That is basically demand pull inflation, what I was telling you, right? So how does demand pull inflation work? Demand pull inflation says that when any component of aggregate demand increases for any reason, what will that do? That will shift aggregate demand curve rightwards, as you can see on the graph, and therefore it will cause the price level to rise. And this is exactly what Phillips curve shows, that when more people are working, they are employed, they are earning something, right? Therefore, they spend more, consumption levels increase. When consumption increases, what happens? Your aggregate demand increases, and that results in demand pull inflation. So that is the entire concept of Phillips curve. Is there any confusion, students? Anything else you want to ask me? Right? So, and as I said, it's not very important concept, at least not very important concept from essay questions point of view or case study, but yeah, it is tested on your MCQs exam. So for that matter, you need to know what Phillips curve is, right? Does it make sense? Perfect. Now let's talk about liquidity trap, and then we'll move forward and jump to some essay questions. Okay, now what is liquidity trap? So students, if you remember, we talked about liquidity preference theory, right? We talked about liquidity preference theory when we were discussing how interest rates are determined in the economy. Now, liquidity preference theory was, let me give you a quick recap, is a theory that explains how interest rates are determined in an economy. Liquidity preference theory. In that, we talked about that there is demand for money and then there's supply of money. And people demand money for three reasons. Transactionally motive, they have to make transactions. Precautionary motive, they want to hold some extra cash in case they need it. And speculative motive, and that is to hold their cash, hold their savings in the form of cash if banks are not paying them enough interest rates, right? Or high interest rates. So there are three reasons why people want to hold cash or money, right? So transactionary motive, to make transactions, that's very simple and obvious, right? Another reason, according to liquidity preference theory, was precautionary motive, which means you want precaution, means some extra caution, precautionary motive, some extra cash just in case you need that. And the third reason why people want to hold money or cash is speculative motive. If banks are not paying high interest rates, then what do people prefer? People prefer to hold their savings in the form of cash. But if banks are paying high interest rate, then obviously you'll deposit your money in a bank. Okay. Now these three things said, liquidity preference theory assumes that interest rates in an economy are determined by the demand and supply of money, right? Now, this liquidity preference theory is a relatively older concept, right? That was introduced by Keynesian economist Keynes. I told you that Keynes economists were more popular during 1930s. Great Depression, right? During 1930s Great Depression, right? And it is one of their theory. Okay, now interest rates are on the y-axis and you have quantity of money on the x-axis. Now, according to liquidity preference theory, where the demand for money intersects with the supply of money, that is where the interest rates will be, right? So according to this theory, there's downward sloping demand curve for money, right? So I'll write this down as MD, money demand, right? And since supply of money, according to liquidity preference theory again, supply of money is determined by the central bank. Supply of money is determined by the central bank. So central bank will decide how much the money supply will be, right? So it will be a straight vertical line. It will be a straight vertical line like this, right? Because money supply is determined by central bank and it's fixed, right? Are you getting? Okay, I want to change the shape of money demand a little bit. Just a second, right? It goes like this, right? Something of the sort. Okay, now think about this, students. So this is your money supply. According to liquidity preference theory, where the money supply and money demand curves intersect, that will be your, that is where your interest rates will be, right? So it's intersecting at this point. So let's say 3%, 4%, whatever it is, that is your interest rates in the economy. Is this making sense? Okay. Now, what is the concept? Up till now, whatever we have discussed, this was liquidity preference theory. So this has nothing to do with liquidity trap. Up till now, whatever I explained you, that is liquidity preference theory that we had already discussed in our class. Now, moving forward with the concept of liquidity trap. Now, what is liquidity trap? Now, think about this. The first thing that you need to understand is this inverse relationship between money supply and interest rates. So higher the money supply, think about this. When the money supply will increase, it will shift to the right. Let me choose a different color. So when money supply increases, it will shift rightwards like this. And what will that do? So with increase in money supply, your interest rate decreases, right? So you move from a higher rate of interest to a lower rate of interest. So you can see for yourself that when money supply of country increases, your interest rates drop down to a lower level. Okay, this is, we know, right? So there's inverse relationship. On the other hand, if I move the money supply curve to the left, which means there's decrease in money supply, what will happen to interest rates? When money supply is decreasing, interest rates will increase. You can see for yourself, right? Easy, is this simple? So there's no complication about this. Okay, and money demand has direct relationship with interest rates. Money demand has direct relationship. How so? Let me show you, right? So if money demand curve moves upwards, right? Have a look at this. If money demand is increasing, so the demand curve will move upwards, shift upwards. What will that do? You can see for yourself that interest rates will increase. We know this, right? Okay, now coming to the main part. The main part says that, just a second, the main part says that liquidity trap is when money supply has no effect on interest rates. And this is what I'm about to show you. Liquidity trap says, let me write down the definition for you, right? Just a second. So liquidity trap says it's a situation in an economy where increase in money supply has no effect on the economy's interest rates. How so? I'll tell you. Refers to a situation where increase in money supply has no effect on interest rates. So this means that central bank is no more, the central bank is not able to control the interest rates in an economy, right? So it's a very difficult situation in which a bank could be, right? Because then if you cannot influence the interest rate, this means the monetary policy has become ineffective. The monetary policy has become ineffective because monetary policy is all about changing interest rates. When you want to boost the economic activity in a country, what you do to your interest rates, you reduce interest rates so that people borrow more, spend more, and so on. Economic activity increases, and vice versa. When you want to reduce economic activity and control inflation, you do the opposite. You increase interest rates, right? Because that means that now borrowing will be more expensive, so people will not borrow that much and all that stuff, right? Now, coming back to the point. So what is liquidity trap? It's a situation where increase in money supply has no effect on interest rates. How do we show it on the graph? That is what I'm about to show you. Okay, have a look at this, students. Now, let's say this is the initial equilibrium in an economy, right? So this was your money supply, this was your money demand, and they were intersecting at this point where the interest rates in the economy were 4%. Now, if your money supply increases, right, from, let's say, MS to MS1, right? Now, we can see that it did decrease your interest rates a little bit. It did decrease your interest rates a little bit. So from previous level of 4%, interest rates fell down to, let's say, 3% or whatever, right? If, let's say, now government wants to increase supply even further. So now let's say the government has increased supply from MS1 to MS2, right? So you can see that there is hardly any change, right? There's hardly any change. Or let's say, even if there is change after this, you will see that there will be no change, right? Okay, so let's say there was a slight decrease in the interest rates. But after this point, students, have a look at this, right? Any further increase is almost having no effect on the money on the interest rates. Any further increase in money supply is having absolutely no effect on the interest rates. Also, because you can see for yourself that the money demand line has become completely horizontal. The money demand line, you can see for yourself, has become completely horizontal, and there's absolutely no interest, no change in the interest rates, right? So this situation is known as liquidity trap, when increase in money supply has no effect on interest rates, and therefore countries' monetary policy becomes ineffective, right? Because obviously if interest rates doesn't change, that will not change the behavior of the people. Then how would you make them consume more, or how would you make them consume less? So that is the entire problem. And therefore countries' monetary policy becomes ineffective. So this is the entire discussion. Is it making sense, students? So very few countries in the world have experienced interest rates. So sorry, liquidity trap. Very few countries in the world have experienced a liquidity trap. One recent example is of Japan. Japan was maintaining so low interest rates that you won't even imagine. So the interest rates sometime back were so low in Japan, they were approximately almost 0%, right? 0.00 something, right? So with this low interest rate, right, students, are you getting me? Now, how much further can you reduce the interest rates, right? I mean, this is already at the lowest possible level, right? So what can be below zero? Either you charge interest or you don't charge interest, right? So if the interest rate is 0%, this means that you're not charging interest at all, right? So in Japan, the interest rates fell almost to 0%, and therefore the monetary policy was no more effective, and there were nothing further the central bank could have done to influence the spending of consumers. So this situation is basically known as liquidity trap. Any questions, any confusion so far? Yeah. Any questions, any confusion, anything that's not clear, anything you want to ask me? If we are good, then move on. Right? Okay, so students, moving on to some past papers practice. Right. So the drawbacks is, as I said, the major drawback is that the monetary policy is ineffective, right? Because with changes in money supply, you are not able to affect the interest rates, and therefore monetary policy has become ineffective. So the very purpose that monetary policy has to do in an economy, fulfill in an economy, that is to change the interest rates and to influence the spending of consumers, that would not be any effective. So then the country is only left with fiscal policy to influence consumer spending. So that's the drawback. Right, we good? Okay, so let's do a paper here. Can you see my screen? Great. Okay, so we have a nice case study. You want me to do the case study, or you want me to do an essay question? Yeah, case study or essay question? Right, case study. Okay, now let's quickly read the case study and then we'll start answering. Okay, now have a look at this. The impact of economic concentration. What is this case study about, right? So this is perhaps, which year is this? Let's quickly see. So this exam is May, June 2020. Okay, so last year, very nice. Okay, the impact of economic concentration. By locating closely together, manufacturers can often gain economic benefits. The makers of industrial machines save on transport and communication costs when they are close to firms that supply their raw materials and components. A group of similar manufacturers attract a large number of workers with similar skills. Educational and training facilities in the area will develop courses and research skills that support local industry. Similar benefits also occur in service industries. For example, with the concentration of information technology in Silicon Valley and finance in New York, Hong Kong, and London, where groups of accountants, merchant bankers, and specialist lawyers in mergers and acquisitions all exist in close proximity. Okay, now what is this case study talking about? The case study is talking about that how similar companies often benefit from locating in the same location, right? So when they're located in the same location, they get some benefits. What type of location benefits do they get, right? They save their cost on transportation and communication because they're close to other firms that provide them raw material components, and they also attract large number of skilled workers who are interested in working in those companies, right? We already know that there are different hubs in the world. Silicon Valley is hub of all the IT companies, Amazon, Google, Facebook, blah blah blah, right? On the other hand, when we talk about finance, so finance has in the world, New York, London, Hong Kong are big financial hubs of the world, right? So this is what the case study is talking about. Okay, the scope of concentration depends on the size of the market. The recent trend towards globalization has increased the size of the available market. This has allowed some internet retailing firms to overcome competition from other countries, but the overall impact has been the delivery of a wide range of goods and services at low prices that have benefited consumers elsewhere. This suggests that globalization has not been a zero-sum game, right? So think about this. Firstly, I'll tell you what the zero-sum game is, right? Now, zero-sum game is a word used in game theory, right? So if you remember, we did use this concept. We did use game theory concept in oligopoly when we were talking about, if one firm is increasing the price, what will the other firm do, right? Do you remember we talked about that oligopoly? There are two options available to either company. Either they can increase the price or they can decrease the price. If they both collectively increase the price, then both companies will benefit. But if one company is cheating the other company by reducing the price, then obviously that will be a problem in everything. Now, what is zero-sum game? To quickly tell you what zero-sum game is, have a look at this. So zero-sum game is when one person's benefit is another person's loss. Zero-sum game. So that is all what you need to remember. This is a technical word that they have used here. Zero-sum game is a concept used in game theory. Is a concept used in game theory which refers to the idea which refers to the idea that one person's or one entity, right? Doesn't necessarily always have to be a person. Benefit will be another person loss, right? Are you getting me? So to give you an example, benefit will be another's person's loss, right? Okay, now think about this. So what would be a zero-sum game? So what we discussed in oligopoly, right? That was a zero-sum game. How was that a zero-sum game? Because let's say if there are two big players in any oligopoly market, let's say Ufone and Warid, right? Or Ufone and Jazz, right? And one company is increasing the price, right? One company is increasing the price and the other company is decreasing the price. So the company that is decreasing the price, given that similar services, both companies are providing similar services, so the customers of company which is charging higher will switch to the other company that is charging less. Are you guys getting me? So just imagine right now that there are two big players in any industry, right? Obviously, we know in telecommunication industry in Pakistan, there are more players, not only two, but let's, for instance, for now, assume that these are the two big players, right? Now, if Jazz is increasing their price, now you tell me, right? If Jazz increases the price of its services, assuming that services are very similar of Jazz and Ufone, right? And Ufone is reducing its price. So what would you expect? How would consumers respond to it? How would consumers respond to this change? If Jazz is charging higher price and Ufone is charging lower price, what would that do? What would happen in the market? Come on, hurry up. That should not be difficult. So if one company, there are two big players, this is the assumption we are making, and both are providing similar services, and one company is charging more, right? They will switch to Ufone, right? Exactly, excellent, right? So when they switch to Ufone, who will make more profit, right? So customers are switching from Jazz to Ufone. So obviously Ufone will make more profit at the expense of Jazz. So this thing is known as zero-sum game. Why is this zero-sum game? Because one company's benefit is coming at the expense of another company. One company's benefit is coming at the expense of other companies. So this is known as zero-sum game. Students, are you getting me? So that is what you need to remember, right? Whereas this case study was saying that it is not a zero-sum game. It is not a zero-sum game, right? This suggests that globalization has not been a zero-sum game. This means that in globalization, everyone has benefited. What does globalization means? Globalization means that obviously nowadays there are more better and faster communication. There's better and faster internet and all that stuff, right? Now think about this. One simplest example of globalization you can consider is online teaching, right? Before this, there has never been a situation in the world where students can study from teachers outside their hometown, right? Because obviously, what's the thing? The thing is that obviously without internet, how would you study online, right? So the only option students had was to go to the schools that are in their locality or to go to tuition academies that are in their city, blah, blah, blah. But with globalization, with the internet, you can study from any good teacher across the globe. That is what it has facilitated. And that is what this case study is saying, that globalization has not been a zero-sum game. This doesn't mean that if one person is benefiting, the other person will necessarily lose. No, every entity, every group is, benefiting to some extent. Is making sense, students? Are we clear on this? Okay. But concentration has not always been beneficial. Concentration, now initially talked about the benefits of concentration. Now it's saying that concentration has not always been beneficial. Silicon Valley has significant traffic congestion, and many local people are priced out of the housing market. Now, what does it mean to be priced out? When there's too much of congestion in an area, right? Think of New York, think of, California, think of all the, big cities in any country, Islamabad, Karachi, Lahore. What happens? Prices, the real estate prices are, they skyrocket because there are so many people coming in the city every year, every month, right? That the demand for that property is high, which means that rents and property prices are very high. So some people are priced out of the housing market. So they are not then even able to afford the expensive housing, right? 7 of the 10 most polluted cities in China are in Hebei province, a center for iron and steel industry, right? So the most polluted cities in China are in Hebei province, right? This concentration has caused large amounts of air, water, and land pollution. So just imagine all the problems that Karachi, Lahore, and Islamabad faces, right? Soon Islamabad will face similar problems if cantonment, the city management council doesn't keep up with the facilities, right? And Karachi is already struggling because it's very, very overcrowded, right? The competing demand for a limited number of workers has also led to high wages, right? Again, then there are so many companies located in that area and they're all competing for the same labor, so the wages also go up. That is what it's saying. Geographical concentration of an industry can lead to problems when demand for the product changes. Okay, this has been evident in the United States, where the city of Detroit has experienced unemployment rates as high as 25%. Okay, and a fall in the population by over 60% because of the decline in Detroit's motor industry caused by vehicle imports and the movement of production of US states where trade unions are not as strong, right? Now, what is this last paragraph talking about? So there is a Detroit city in USA, right? And it was hub of auto industry in USA, right? So Ford company and GMC, you must have heard of GMC, Ford, right? So these are car manufacturing, American car manufacturing companies, right? So they were located in Detroit, but then obviously what happened? The demand changed. Americans started importing cheaper cars from Japan, Germany, and blah, 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 and so on. And the industry declined. When industry declined, what happened? That unemployment rose as high as 25%. So 1 in 4 people started becoming unemployed in Detroit because previously they were affiliated with auto industry. Now that auto industry doesn't exist anymore, and so on. And the people in the city started leaving the city because there's no point staying there. They had jobs previously, but now they are jobless and all that stuff, and all these things, right? So this is what the case study is talking about. Are we good on this, students? Right? Now there's a graph. Let's quickly look at the graph. So what is the unemployment rates in USA and Detroit 2010 and 2017? So you can see, right? In 2010, unemployment rate in Detroit was this much, right? It was really high. Then it fell a little bit, right? So it was, where is it, right? It was very high, then it fell a little bit, then rose again, then it fell, and then it rose a little again. Whereas for the US, it was mainly on the downward sloping trend, right? Okay, are we good on this, students? Can you move on? Okay. Now, this being said, we'll move on and discuss the case study. Okay, questions. Explain the meaning of zero-sum game and game theory. Does it make sense? Right? So I've just explained you what is zero-sum game. So you'll say zero-sum game is a situation where one person's benefit is another person's loss, right? Another very interesting example that is coming to my mind, think about relative grading. Think about this. Do you guys know how relative grading works in Cambridge exams? This is exactly how your exams are graded. Relative grading. Have you heard about it? Percentile, relative grading. Now think about this. So the way it works is that every year, let's say A-levels economics exam. So you'll be taking A-levels economics exam this year. So what they do is that, let's say the total score was 100 marks, right? So the total exam was 30 marks MCQs and 70 marks paper 2, right? Paper 4, theory 1, right? Okay. Now, if students are scoring their score out of 100 marks, now think about this. Let's do it very carefully. And there is relative grading. Now, what will relative grading do, right? So it says that if, let's say, 10,000 students appeared in the exam this year, only 10% or 5% or whatever the percentage Cambridge has decided, only that percentage of students will get A grades. I repeat myself. If it's relative grading, which it is in Cambridge, right? The way working marking works, now the way they grade papers, the way they give you grades. Now, what is this concept? So out of the 100 marks question, right, paper that you attempt, and let's say the number of students that have attempted the exam across the globe with 10,000, right? So this is the marks score and the total number of people who appeared in the exam with 10,000, right? Cambridge will assign a percentage, and that is the percentage of students who will get A's, and similarly, a certain percentage of students will get B's, and then a certain percentage of students will get C, D, and so on, right? Now, think about this. If, let's say, Cambridge has decided that 10% of you will get A, right? 10% of you will get B's. Students, are you following me or not? If there's any confusion in the middle, please ask me there and then, right? 10% of students will get C, 10% of students will get D, 10% of students will get E, and I don't know how much we have covered, right? 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, right? Or let's say we can increase the percentages, right? We can increase the percentages. So let's say instead of 10, we are making it 20, right? So 20% students are getting A's, then the next 20 are getting B's, next 20 are getting C's, next 20% are getting D's, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and remaining 20% are getting E's. Let's say no one gets to fail, right? Which is unfair, right? Exactly. That is what I'm about to explain you, right? So this can be unfair in some cases, right? Now think about this. You have to be amongst top 20% to get an A, right? So what is 20% of this? So 20% of 10,000, 1,000 would be 200, and this is 1,000. 2,000. So 10,000 of 2,000. So you have to be, yes, it makes 2,000. So you have to be amongst top 2,000 students, exactly. So you have to be amongst top 2,000 students who appeared in the A-levels economics exam to be able to get an A grade. Students, are you getting me? This is how the relative grading works. Now, it doesn't matter how much you score. It doesn't really matter how much you score unless you're not in the top 2,000 students. Out of the 10,000 students who took the exam, you will not get an A. Students, are you getting me or not, right? On the other hand, the other type of grading is absolute grading. So we just talked about relative grading. Absolute grading is very simple and easy. Absolute grading would say that if you get 80% marks on the exam, you get an A. They're not talking about the top 20% or you have to be top 15% or something of the sort. No, 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 no. Like the way it works in your school. How does it work in your school, right? So in most of the schools across Pakistan and in other countries, the grading is absolute grading. You get 90% and above out of 100, you get 90% and above marks, you get an A star. You get 80% and above marks on an exam, you get an A. You get 70% and above marks, you get a B. You get, what is that called? You get a B, you get 60% and above, you get C, and so on and so forth. So this is how absolute grading works. Now, one final thing, how is relative grading zero-sum game? How is relative grading zero-sum game? Because one person's benefit is another person's loss. Obviously, if you have scored well on an exam, now always listen to me very carefully, right? So if you score well on an exam, and that is relative grading, you have pushed. So let's say you were previously 2001, right? So your ranking was 2001. And on the last question, you scored really well. So you have moved to 1999th position. So what did you do? You pushed the person who was previously on 2000 to below 2000. Are you getting what I'm trying to say? So with you doing well on an exam, right? Someone else would be moved down your position because obviously everything is ranking wise, right? It's not about how much score you get on the exam. It's about what is your rank amongst other people, right? So if you move above the rank because you scored well, then another person will be moved down the rank and therefore they will get not A, but a B. Right, they follow relative grading. Exactly, right. Now this is not correct. This is not correct. How many people they assign A, B, and C and so on, but obviously it's always relative grading, right? Percentile, always relative grading. Is it making sense? Students, confusion? Surprised to know this? I didn't know you guys didn't know this, right? So it's always relative grading. This is how they do it. Because every year they will not give more than a certain number of A's. Last year it might have been different because of COVID and everything. You know, students contested their grades and a lot was changed and a lot happened. But otherwise, it's always relative, right? So this is what zero sum game is. So you'll explain this in your own words. You can use the exact same definition that I explained over here. Zero sum game is a concept that is used in game theory, which refers to the idea that one person's entity's benefit will be another person's loss. And what example you can give for that? Either you can use the relative grading example, or you can give the oligopoly example that I was giving you, right? Where one, like the same example that we just discussed in class today, right? If there are two big players, they are providing same services, and one company is charging more, then customers of that company will move to the other company that is charging less, right? So that would mean that Jazz profit will go down and UFON profit will go up. So that is what you have to explain. Okay, so I'm sending you the new link. Quickly join the new link, then you have limited time, right? So I'm sending you the new link.